The wind comes down off the rimrock before dawn, and it carries the smell of snowmelt and old cedar across a ranch where two people who share blood are already standing in the cold yard, not looking at each other, waiting for an old man to die so they can begin the part they have practiced. Garrett Hartley checks his phone in the half-dark. His cousin Lorraine stands by the corral fence with her arms crossed, watching the lit window of the upstairs bedroom where their uncle has been failing for 11 days. Neither of them goes inside. Inside is the hospice nurse and the slow machine of breathing, and neither of them wants to be in the room when it stops, because being in the room means feeling something, and they have both spent the winter teaching themselves not to. A truck sits at the end of the gravel engine, ticking as it cools. A man no one in Stratham Falls has met, yet sits behind the wheel with a German shepherd beside him, and he is reading a letter for the 4th time, and his hands are not steady. He has driven 900 miles to keep a promise he did not know he had made. If this story finds a soft place in you, stay with it all the way to the end. Some debts are paid by men who never knew they were owed. Wendell Hartley was 81 years old, and for most of those years, Coldwater Bench had belonged to him the way a name belongs to a face. The ranch sat in a high fold of eastern Oregon where the land ran out of trees and turned to sage and basalt and a sky too big to hold. 1,200 acres of it, most leased to cattle, 100 kept for the horses he no longer rode. He had buried a wife under the lone elm by the spring house and never remarried. He had no children. He had a brother once gone now, and the brother's 2 grandchildren. And that was the whole of his blood in the world. He had run the place alone, past the age when a man should, fixing fence, in weather that put younger men indoors because the work was the only conversation he had left. His hands had gone to knots, his left hip dragged. He had stopped going to church in town, not because he stopped believing, but because the drive hurt, and because the looks of people pitying a widower wore on him worse than the silence did. Then the doctors in Bend told him the thing in his chest had a name and a calendar, and Wendell drove home that day and sat in the truck a long while before he went in, looking at the land, the way you look at something you are about to hand to someone else. He did not call his lawyer first. He called nobody. He sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad for 3 nights running, and what he wrote there was the beginning of the trouble that came after. Garrett heard about the diagnosis from the county, the way money always hears things first. He was 44, lean and restless, a man who had sold 2 businesses and started a third, and carried the air of someone always calculating the angle of a room. He drove up from Boise within the week wearing a barn coat he had bought new for the occasion, and he stood in his uncle's kitchen and talked about easements and water rights and how a place like this could be subdivided into ranchettes that would sell to people from California for more money than Wendell had seen in his whole life. Wendell listened and said little when Garrett left. The old man washed the 1 coffee cup his nephew had used and set it upside down on the rack, and he did not call him back. Lorraine came 2 weeks after that. She was 39, a schoolteacher from Spokane, divorced, raising a boy alone on a salary that never quite reached the end of the month. She did not talk about easements. She cleaned the porch and made a casserole that sat untouched in the refrigerator, and asked her uncle once, quietly, whether he was afraid. He told her the truth, which was that he was not afraid of dying, but he was afraid of leaving the land to people who would not love it. She took that the wrong way. She thought he meant her. She left earlier than she had planned. So by the time the cold set in hard, Wendell Hartley had 2 heirs who both believed the ranch should be theirs and who had begun in the slow, poisonous way of families to hate each other for it. What neither of them knew was the name written at the top of the yellow legal pad, underlined twice, with a phone number beside it that Wendell had carried in his wallet for 9 years. The man in the truck was named Travis Calder, and he was 37 years old. And the last time he had stood on Coldwater Bench, he had been 19 and running from something he could not have named at the time. He had grown up 2 valleys over in a trailer that smelled of his father's drinking. And the summer he turned 19, he had wrecked his life in the small ways that lead to the big ones, and a county judge had given him a choice that was not really a choice out of that summer. Somehow, he had ended up hauled out to a ranch run by an old man who needed a hand and did not ask questions. He had expected to be worked and yelled at. Instead, Wendell Hartley had handed him a fencing tool and walked the line beside him and said almost nothing for 3 months. It was the almost nothing that had saved him. Wendell never once told Travis he was a disappointment. He never once asked what he had done. He gave him a job to finish and trusted him to finish it. And when Travis did, the old man nodded in a way that landed harder than any praise. At the end of that summer, Wendell drove him to the recruiting office in Bend himself, waited in the parking lot, and when Travis came out with the papers signed, the old man shook his hand and said, "Only do not come back here until you can look at yourself in the glass." Travis had taken that literally. He had let 18 years go by. He had made a Marine of himself, and then a better one, and somewhere in there, a dog had come into his life and changed it again. The shepherd's name was Brick, a working line male, grown out of the kennels at Lejeune, and the 2 of them had done 4 deployments between them and come home with the kind of bond that does not need explaining to anyone who has had it, and cannot be explained to anyone who has not. When the letter reached him, forwarded twice, the return address meant nothing for a moment. Then he opened it and saw the handwriting. The same square, slow hand that had once written a grocery list and pinned it to a barn post. And Travis Calder sat down on the floor of his apartment and read a dead man's lawyer telling him he had been named in a will. He almost did not go. He told himself he had no claim, that whatever the old man wanted, it was a family matter, and he was not family. Brick lay against his leg the whole night while he argued with himself, and in the morning the dog was at the door before Travis had decided anything, standing with his leash in his mouth, waiting the way he waited when he already knew where they were going. So they went. The drive took 2 days. He came up the gravel in the gray hour before the sun cleared the rim, and he saw 2 people standing in the yard, and he knew before he stopped the truck that he had arrived at the worst possible moment, which was also, he would understand later, the only moment that would have mattered. Garrett saw the truck first. He crossed the yard with his hand already out and his salesman's face already on, assuming the stranger was someone from the funeral home or the county. When Travis stepped down and the big shepherd came down after him and stood at his knee, ears up, reading Garrett, the way a dog reads a man, the hand faltered halfway. Travis told him his name. He watched it land on neither of them. Then he told them why he had come, and the morning changed. Lorraine had come off the fence by then. She looked from the Marine to the dog to her cousin, and the first thing she said was that there had to be a mistake. The second thing she said, lower, was a question aimed at Garrett, and the question was whether he had known about this. The way Garrett did not answer told her everything, and told Travis something too. The hospice nurse came out onto the porch then and said, in the flat, gentle voice they train into them, that it would not be long now, and if anyone wanted to say a thing, they should come up. Nobody moved for a moment. The wind worked at the elm by the spring house. Brick sat down in the cold mud without being told, and faced the house, and that small thing, the dog choosing the dying man over the 2 living ones, seemed to settle something in Travis. He went up the stairs. The room smelled of medicine and wood smoke. Wendell Hartley lay smaller than the land had made him, his big knotted hands quiet on the quilt, his eyes half open and far away. Travis stood in the doorway with his cover in his hands, like a much younger man, and for a moment he could not make himself cross the floor. Then the dog went past him, low and quiet, and put his chin on the edge of the bed. The old man's hand moved. It found the rough fur and stayed there, and his eyes came back from wherever they had been and found the man standing in the door. Something worked in his ruined face. He could not say much. What he said, Travis would carry the rest of his life. And it was only this: "You came back, and then, after a long breath, the rest of it. Do not let them sell it to people who will not love it." Travis said he would not. He did not yet know what he was promising or what it would cost. He only knew that the old man had asked, and that he had spent 18 years learning how to keep a line once it was given to him. Wendell Hartley died a little after noon, with his hand in the fur of a dog he had never met, and the quiet that came after was the kind that the high country does better than any church. The reading of the will was set for the following Thursday, at the office of a lawyer named Errol Pike, in Stratham Falls, above the feed store on the main street. Travis almost did not go to that either. Brick made the decision for him again. The office was small and overwarm, and smelled of old paper. Garrett arrived in a pressed shirt with a lawyer of his own, a smooth young man from Boise named Sutton, who introduced himself with a card and a handshake that lasted a half-second too long. Lorraine came alone in her coat from the day on the porch, sitting with her hands folded, like a woman in a waiting room at a hospital. Travis took the chair by the door with the dog at his boots, and he understood that he was the only person there who wanted nothing. Errol Pike was a heavy old man, with reading glasses pushed up on his bald head, and he had been Wendell Hartley's lawyer for 30 years, and he did not like what he was about to read. That was plain on his face. He cleared his throat and began. The will was simple. The way the old man had been simple: Coldwater Bench, the 1,200 acres, the house, the stock, the equipment, all of it was placed in a trust. The trust named Travis Calder as trustee and working manager for his lifetime, charged with keeping the land in cattle and never selling it whole to developers. On Travis's death, or his choosing to leave the land, passed in equal shares to Wendell's blood, to Garrett and to Lorraine and to their children, but only the land, never the right to subdivide and sell it off in pieces, that clause written in 3 different ways so no court could miss it. The old man had given the Marine the keys and given his blood the inheritance, and tied them together so that none of them could ruin it alone. The room was silent. Then Garrett laughed one short, ugly sound, and his Boise lawyer put a hand on his arm, and that was the moment the fight that had been simmering all winter came up into the open air. Garrett did not yell. That was the frightening thing about him. He smiled and spoke in complete sentences, and what he said was that the document was obviously the product of a confused, dying man, that his uncle had not been competent, that a stranger, a drifter with a dog, had clearly inserted himself into a vulnerable old man's final days to extract an inheritance. He looked at Travis when he said drifter. He said the word slowly, so it would land. Travis did not answer. He had learned a long time ago that the man who is winning does not need to talk, and the man who is losing cannot stop, and he was content to let Garrett show the room, which one he was. Errol Pike's face had gone red. He said the will had been signed 19 months earlier, long before any final days witnessed properly, with a doctor's letter on file attesting Wendell's competence on the day of signing. He said he had the originals in his own safe. He said all of this in the voice of a man who had watched families do this before and was sick to death of it. Garrett's lawyer said they would be contesting. He said it the way a man closes a car door, final, and the meeting ended. Lorraine caught Travis on the stairs, going down. She did not look at him the way her cousin had. She looked tired and a little ashamed, and she said she had not known about any of it, and she asked him straight whether he had ever asked Wendell for anything. Travis told her the truth, which was that he had not spoken to the old man in 18 years, and had driven 900 miles, believing he would arrive too late to say even goodbye. She looked at him a moment longer. Then she said she believed him, and the saying of it seemed to cost her something, because believing him meant the fight her cousin was starting was a fight against a dead man's clear wish, and she did not have the stomach Garrett had. He carried her answer down the stairs and out into the cold, and it sat with him through the long drive home, a small, unsettling weight he could not set down. He moved into the ranch that week, into the small room off the kitchen that had been the hired hand's room because it did not feel right to sleep in the old man's bed. The room held a steel cot, a pine dresser with a drawer that stuck, and a window that looked out on the calving shed. Brick took the rag rug by the stove as if he had always owned it, and Travis began to learn what he had taken on, which was a working ranch in late winter with calving about to start, and a man 18 years out of practice running it. The first morning he walked the place alone in the gray light, the dog ranging out ahead, and he counted what the old man had left him. Fences that needed pulling tight before the ground froze again. A tractor with a slow leak in the hydraulics, a hayloft running thin for this far from spring, 40 cow-calf pairs already heavy, and a calendar that would not wait on a man's grief or his inexperience. He stood in the middle of it with the cold working into his boots and understood that wanting nothing was a luxury. He had given up the moment he said he would not let them sell it. He was not too proud to learn. He drove down to the feed store and asked the man behind the counter who in the valley still knew how to pull a calf. And the man looked at him a long moment, sizing up the stranger the whole town was already talking about, and then told him to look for Marla Dunkirk out on the Burnt Fork Road, that she had run cattle her whole life and would either help him or run him off, no telling which. Marla Dunkirk was 70 and built like a fence post and had buried 2 husbands and a son. She came out to Coldwater Bench in a faded blue truck older than Travis, parked it crooked in the yard, and got down slow with her knees popping. She looked at the dog a long moment. She looked at the man a longer one. Then she asked him one question. She asked whether he meant to keep the place in cattle or whether he was another one waiting to flip it for the easy money. Travis said he meant to keep it. Marla said she had heard that before, from men with softer hands than his, and they had all sold inside 2 years. She walked the calving shed with him after that, and she told him everything he was doing wrong, and there was a good deal of it. The pens were set up so a heifer in trouble had to be hauled the long way around. The colostrum in the freezer had gone past using the chains, and the puller hung where a tired man would reach for them in the wrong order at 4 in the morning. She moved through the place, naming each failure flatly, not unkindly, the way a person names weather. Travis did not argue with a word of it. He fetched a pencil and wrote it all down on the back of a feed receipt, and that, more than anything he could have said, was what turned her. A man who argued, Marla told him later, was a man who already knew everything and would lose his cattle proving it. A man who wrote it down was a man who meant to stay. By the end of the afternoon, she had decided in the private court, where country people decide such things, that he would do. She left him a list of names and a jar bag bomb, and a warning that she would be back to check his pens. And she was. She was the first. There were others. Corey Tubbs had worked for Wendell Hartley the last 6 years, a young man slow of speech and quick with stock, who had stayed on through the dying because he did not know where else to go. Garrett had gotten to him first. Travis understood that within a day of meeting him, the way Corey would not hold his eyes, the way he flinched at the cousin's name, Corey had signed something for Garrett. Travis did not know what. Yet, he only knew that the boy was carrying something heavy and ashamed, and that Brick, who liked almost no one quickly, would not go near Corey at all, and stood between the boy and the door whenever he came into the kitchen. The fight moved into the courts the way water moves into low ground, slowly, and then all at once. Garrett's lawyer filed to contest the will and to have the trust set aside, and the grounds they chose were not stupid. They were patient, and they were cruel. They argued undue influence. They argued that Travis Calder had a criminal record from a juvenile arrest 18 years gone, dug up and waved like a flag. They argued that a man with a violent dog had no business holding land in trust for a respectable family. And they produced, 3 weeks in, a document that landed in the case like a stone in a still pond. It was a deed transfer dated 4 months before Wendell died, signing 40% of Coldwater Bench to Garrett Hartley outright, witnessed and notarized in what looked exactly like the old man's square, slow hand. Errol Pike went white when he saw the copy. He told Travis in the overwarm office with the dog at the door that if that document was real, the trust was already a lie, that Wendell could not have given the land to the trust whole if he had already signed nearly half of it away, and that the whole thing would unravel. Travis asked the only question that mattered. He asked whether it was real. Pike took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, and said he did not know. He said the signature was good. He said the notary was a real notary, a woman who worked out of a check-cashing place in the next county, and who notarized 40 things a day, and would not remember one rancher among them. He said the witness line carried a name, and the name was Corey Tubbs. Travis drove back to the ranch in the dark and did not turn on the radio. He thought about the boy who would not meet his eyes. He thought about the dog who would not go near him. He thought about a forged deed and a coerced witness and a cousin patient, enough to lay all this groundwork 4 months before the old man was even gone, and he understood that he was not fighting a grieving relative reaching for too much. He was fighting a man who had planned a theft with a clear head and protected it as he went. That was the night the thing turned from a sad family quarrel into something with teeth. He did not go to the boy. That was the first lesson the old man had taught him without words. All those years ago, you do not go at a frightened thing head on. You give it a job and you wait. So Travis kept Corey on. He paid him on time. He worked beside him in the calving shed through the cold nights when the heifers came hard, and he did not say one word about Garrett or the deed or the thing the boy had signed. He let the silence do what silence does. The calving was the proving of him, and the town watched it the way the town watched everything, from a distance, over coffee. A bad spring would have ended Travis quietly. The land would have turned on him, and the people would have shrugged and said the old man's stranger could not hack it. Instead, the cold came down hard in the second week, and a storm closed the roads, and a heifer went down in the night with a calf turned wrong inside her, and Marla Dunkirk could not get through the drifts to help. Travis pulled that calf alone at 3 a.m. by the light of a work lamp, with Corey holding the heifer's head and Brick lying in the straw, watching. and when the calf came out blue and still, Travis cleared its mouth and rubbed it down with a feed sack and breathed through it the way the dog had once breathed life back into a man both of them had thought was gone, and the calf shuddered and kicked and lived. Corey Tubbs sat back in the straw and cried. He was not crying about the calf. It came out of him. Then the whole of it, the way these things come out when a man has been holding them too long. Garrett had come to him in the fall before the old man was even bad, and had told him the land was going to be lost to a stranger, that Wendell had been tricked, that the only way to save the ranch for the family was to sign a paper saying he had watched the old man sign a deed. Corey had not watched anyone sign anything. He had signed because Garrett had promised him the job would be safe and threatened that it would not be otherwise, and because he was 23 and scared and had nowhere else to go, and because Garrett had a way of making a lie sound like the only loyal thing left to do. Travis listened to all of it without moving. Then he asked the one question that mattered. He asked whether Corey would say it again, the truth, this time, to a judge, knowing what it would cost him with Garrett. The boy was quiet a long time. Outside, the wind worked the shed door. Inside, the new calf found its feet and went looking for its mother. And Corey Tubbs, who had spent the whole winter being the smallest and most frightened person in the story, said yes. That was the turn, but it was not the end, because Garrett Hartley was not a man who left his work unguarded. When word reached him that the witness had wavered, and word always reached him, Garrett moved to protect the lie. The boy got a letter from the Boise lawyer, reminding him that he had sworn to a document that recanting now was itself a crime, perjury, that he could go to jail. The letter was careful and legal and terrifying to a young man who had never had a lawyer aimed at him before. Corey came to Travis with it, shaking in his hand, ready to run, ready to take it all back rather than face a cell. Travis read the letter twice. He thought about how the old man would have handled it, not with a fight, with a fact. He took Corey to Errol Pike, and the three of them sat in the overwarm office, and Pike explained in his slow, heavy voice that a man who tells the truth about a forgery he was tricked into is treated very differently by a court than a man who keeps the lie going, and that the lawyer's letter, and that threats dressed as law were the whole of Garrett Hartley's business. Then Pike said something that changed the shape of everything. He said the deed had a flaw. The deed was dated the 14th of October. Pike had pulled Wendell's medical records for the competency question, and the records showed that on the 14th of October, Wendell Hartley had been in the hospital in Bend for 3 days, having fluid drawn off his lungs 90 miles from the notary's office where the deed was supposedly signed and witnessed. A dying man cannot sign a deed in 2 places at once. The forgery had a date on it, and the date was a lie that could be proved with a hospital wristband. Garrett had been careful. He had been clever. He had built his lie before his uncle got sick, and the sickness had moved faster than the plan, and he had never gone back to check that the date still held. The thing he had not thought to guard was the calendar. Travis felt no triumph when Pike laid it out. He felt the old, tired weight of watching a man's greed run him onto the rocks. He thought of Wendell at the kitchen table with his yellow pad, trying so hard to protect a piece of ground from exactly this. And he understood that the old man had seen it all coming, had known his own blood, and had reached across 18 years and 900 miles for the one person he trusted to stand in the gap. The hearing was set for the first week of true spring. The night before it, Travis did a thing he had been putting off. He drove out to the lone elm by the spring house where Wendell's wife was buried, and where the old man now lay beside her, 2 flat stones in the new grass, and he stood there a long while, with the dog sitting at his knee in the rimrock, going gold in the last light. He had not come to talk to the dead. He had come to ask himself the question. Garrett's lawyer had spent the whole winter pressing on him the question of whether he had any right to be here at all, a stranger, a man with a record, holding a family's land. He found his answer in the simplest place. He had been asked by a man who had no reason to ask and every reason to know better. The old man had not handed him the land because he had earned it. He had handed it to him because he trusted him to keep a promise he could not keep himself. And the keeping was the whole of the right, and there was no more to it than that. Brick stood up then and faced the road, ears forward, the low sound moving in his chest, and a moment later headlights swung up the gravel. It was Lorraine. She got out and stood awkwardly by her car, and she had her boy's school photo in her purse and a thing she needed to say. She said she had spent the winter believing the land was owed to her, that she had needed it to be owed to her, because she was tired and broke, and raising a child alone, and the ranch had looked like rest. Then she had read the will again, the real one, and she had understood what her uncle had done. He had not cut her out. He had protected her from her cousin and from herself both, had made it so the land could not be sold out from under her child the way Garrett had wanted, had given a stranger the burden of keeping it so that her blood could keep the having of it. She said she was done fighting. She said she would stand up in the hearing and say so. Travis asked her why she was telling him this the night before, alone, in the dark. She looked at the 2 stones under the elm and said, because Garrett would call her a traitor in front of the whole county tomorrow, and she wanted to have said it once to someone, somewhere quiet, before she had to say it loud. Something in the plain courage of it reached a place in him the whole hard winter had not. The hearing was held in the small courtroom in the county seat, and the whole valley came because nothing draws country people like the spectacle of a family tearing itself apart over land. Garrett came in his pressed shirt with his Boise lawyer and the smooth confidence of a man who had never in his life been told no by anyone he could not outspend. He had no idea what was about to happen. That was the thing about men like him, Travis thought, watching him take his seat. They were so certain the world ran on leverage that they never saw the moment the leverage ran out. It came apart for Garrett in an hour, and not through any speech of Travis's. Travis said almost nothing. He had learned that from an old man on a fence line 18 years before. The truth, laid out plain by people with nothing to gain, does more than any argument. Arrow Pike entered the hospital records. He moved slow the way heavy old men move, laying each page on the clerk's table like a man dealing a hand he already knew would win. He set the deed down first, the forgery with its date of the 14th of October in the old man's square hand. Beside it, he laid the hospital admission form for the 12th, the wristband sealed in a plastic sleeve, the nurse's chart showing fluid drawn off Wendell's lungs on the morning of the 14th, and the doctor's signed note placing him in a bed in Bend for 3 days running. He named the distance aloud. 90 miles of mountain road between the hospital and the check-cashing place where the deed was supposedly signed. Then he stopped talking and let the judge do the arithmetic of a man who could not have been in 2 counties at once. The Boise lawyer rose to say the dates could be clerical errors. Pike did not even turn to him. He said a wristband was not a clerical error, and a hospital did not misplace 3 days of a dying man. And he sat back down, and the room understood that the thing was already decided. Then Corey Tubbs took the stand, white and shaking and 23, and he told the truth he had been carrying all winter, told how Garrett had come to him with a lie dressed as loyalty and a threat dressed as a favor, and when the Boise lawyer rose to remind him of the perjury he risked, The judge told the lawyer to sit down in a voice that ended the contest then and there. Lorraine took the stand last and said, in front of the whole county, that her uncle had been clear and competent and kind, that the only confused thing in the room was her own grief, and that she would not be party to overturning his clear wish. Garrett did not shout even then. He sat very still while it all came down around him, and his face did the thing his uncle's washing of the coffee cup had foretold months before, the face of a man recalculating an angle that no longer exists. When the judge ruled the deed a forgery and upheld the trust whole, Garrett gathered his coat with the same smooth motions he had walked in with, and he left without a word to anyone, and he did not come back to Stratham Falls, and the county did not miss him. Systemic things like Garrett do not stand and face a reckoning. They gather their coats and move to the next soft place. The land, though, was safe, and that was the thing the old man had asked for. The county did not refer Corey for the forgery. The truth, he told freely, weighed more than the lie he had been tricked into, exactly as Pike had said it would. Spring came on, hard and green. After that, the way it does in high country, all at once, after a winter that swore it never would, the calving finished out strong. Marla Dunkirk came around more than she would admit to needing to, and taught Corey things the boy soaked up like dry ground, and the two of them ran the stock while Travis learned the books and the leases and the thousand small griefs of keeping a ranch whole. Lorraine brought her boy out in May. Bye. Travis kept his promise to the will and to himself both, and he did not let the child near anything that could hurt him. Kept him to the safe edges of the work, the gentle horses and the new calves and the porch in the evening. The boy took to the dog the way children do, and Brick, who liked almost no one, lay in the dirt, and let the child use his side for a pillow, and Lorraine stood on the porch and watched, and did not say anything because there was nothing that needed saying. She did not move to the ranch. She kept her job and her life in Spokane, the way the old man's will had freed her to do, knowing the land would be there held and worked and waiting for her boy and his children after him. She came out in the summers. That was enough. That was more than enough. Travis stayed. He had come up the gravel believing he would say goodbye to a man and drive away, and instead he had found the thing he had been driving away from his whole life, which was a place that asked him to stay and trusted him to do it. He took the old man's bed at last, sometime in June, because it had stopped feeling like a stranger's bed and started feeling like a post he had been given to hold. Brick took the foot of it. The rag rug by the stove went cold and unused, and neither of them missed it. On a morning in early summer, Travis walked the fence line up toward the rimrock, the way the old man had taught him, the dog ranging out ahead and circling back, the wire singing faint in the wind. He came to the lone elm, and the two flat stones, and the new grass, and he stopped there the way he had taken to stopping, not to talk, just to stand a minute where the man was, who had reached out of the ground and given him a life. The cattle moved on the bench below. The high sky held its impossible blue. Somewhere down at the house a screen door banged, and a child laughed, and the sound carried up the slope, thin and clear, in the morning air. Brick came back from his ranging and sat down in the grass at the foot of the stones, ears forward, facing out over the land. The old man had spent his last strength to protect, the way the dog had faced a dying man's room that first cold morning, choosing the thing worth guarding. Travis put his hand on the warm fur and stood there a while longer, with no place else he needed to be. You spend a long time, some of you, running from the places that needed you. You tell yourself you have no right to be wanted, no right to be kept, that the door closed behind you for good. And then one day a letter finds you, or a hand finds your dog's fur, or an old man you wronged by leaving reaches across all those years and trusts you with the one thing he loved, and you understand that you were never running from the land. You were running from being loved enough to be asked to stay. May the one who keeps the high country green keep you and yours, and may a door you thought was shut for good open one cold morning to a road that leads you home.